and welcome to the Oddity Archive, the show that always seems just a bit out of phase with the rest of the world, that is. Anyway, let's just get right down to business here. Once upon a time, I reckoned myself something of an audio engineer. I got my first multi-track recorder at age 15 on cassette, no less. And then I spent the next 3 years or so learning the ins and outs, usually just by trial and error of recording. And then after high school, I went and tried to start pursuing it as a potential career. But then just life happened and other interests happened, and I got thrown way off the path. So, today's episode is something of a homecoming for me, and not to mention a bit of a refresher course. So, what's today's big topic, you might ask? In case my box wasn't obvious enough, stereo test records.
He's over there, I'm over here. Who needs this kind of perfect isolation?
She's over there, I'm over here. Each date becomes a hi-fi demonstration.
Let's face it, the people who bought most of the first generation of stereo test records, we're talking the late 50s and early 60s here, weren't really in it to properly set up their systems. They just wanted some stereophonic trickery. And more often than not, that's exactly what they got.
Anybody for ping pong?
Aside from all the cute gimmicks, most, if not all of these records, of this period at least, provide a fascinating glimpse into early 2 and 3 track stereo recording techniques. Proper multitrack as we know it today, capable of overdubs, hadn't really happened yet. As time wore on, the market for stereo test records turned to primarily home hi-fi geeks and professionals. These later records usually consisted of proper system tests, often designed to push your system to its limits. By the mid-70s, home stereo equipment had largely improved to the point where stereo test albums became, again, largely unnecessary. The final, notable stereo test albums were hybrid parody releases, available on vinyl and subsequently cassette, courtesy of the National Lampoon.
As I was saying, sometimes two speakers get along and sometimes they don't. When they're in unison...
Do you mean when they're in phase?
I was coming to that!
Stop showing off your volume. Will you please stop showing off your volume? At the party last week, you made a fool of yourself.
Ah!
You know that, huh?
Are you going to bring up that party again?
And that reminds me, big boy. Oh, your bass isn't what it used to be.
I personally have 2 stereo test albums in my collection, and before we look at either of them, I think it would be in our best interest, especially for our non-audio geek viewers, if I were to run down some of the basic terminology, so you know what to listen for and all that. And admittedly, I'm dumbing this down quite a bit, and I also have to use my notes, because it's just too much for my puny brain to remember. But let's go through some of these. Frequency. So the measurement of a pitch, the measurement of a sound. So the lower the tone, the lower the frequency. The higher the tone, the higher the frequency. Hertz. So hertz, kilohertz, the unit of measurement of a frequency per second. So for a good basic example, 100 hertz. If you could see the waveform, the visual representation of that sound, you would notice that it would peak, or I guess cycle as it were, 100 times per second, hence 100 hertz. Phase. So this is kind of a funky one, but as far as today's show is concerned, it basically means that your speakers are working together instead of against each other. So if you were having a phase problem, entire areas of frequencies would be getting cut out and your volume level would drop considerably, but these days it's just really not that big an issue, especially if you're watching on a laptop or your computer with a pair of headphones, even cheap headphones. Let's see here. Flutter. So, have you ever listened to an old LP or, better yet, something tape-based, like a cassette or an 8-track, and you hear, usually in the higher tones, the sound wavering just a bit? That's flutter. And, let's see here. Last one. Noise level. So, again, dumbing this down a bit, but for all intents and purposes today, inherent noise from equipment. The inherent noise from an LP, from just the needle running along the wax, or the equipment itself. So, like, if you've been watching Archive long enough and I do all these record segments, you've probably at some point or another heard just a little humming coming from my turntable. And it's just what it is. It doesn't have a grounding problem or anything. It's just once you put that needle down, it hums a little. And the instant you take it off, you can leave the turntable running and everything. It's fine. It's just the equipment. So, there you go. Anyway, that ought to do it for all the dry, boring academic stuff. Anyway, who's up for some good old-fashioned two-channel quirkiness?
Audio Fidelity Records presents a new stereophonic sound spectacular. The world of stereo is filled with spectacular sound surprises.
Only way to settle this argument is to play Russian roulette. Do you know how to play Russian roulette?
No, I don't.
You play Russian roulette this way. I have this pistol. One bullet in chamber. Spin cylinder. Cock the gun. Hold the gun to your head and pull the trigger. I go first. Now you go. Here is the pistol. Ha-ha, you lose.
What do you say we make it 2 out of 3?
We just can't seem to stay away from audio fidelity around here, can we? You know, the later home of the happy hamsters. Anyway, this thing is from 1963, and this is from back when Audio Fidelity was actually a halfway decent, legit record label. And in case you couldn't tell from the rather gaudy artwork, this is not one of those discs that's really designed to give you much of a good technical assessment of your system. Indeed, there's only one test on here, and it feels like an afterthought. So with that in mind, just for jollies, let's play the one test on here all the way through. Feel free to play along at home.
As long as we're getting a bit technical, I'd like to remind you that most women and children can perceive higher frequencies of sound than most men. This demonstration consists of a continuous sweep of audio frequencies from 50 cycles to past the limit of audibility. First, 50 cycles to 500 cycles. .500 cycles to 5,000 cycles. $5,000 to $10,000. 10,000 to 15,000.
Let me interject here. Vinyl can do something that CDs can't. Vinyl can reproduce sounds really up to infinity. Now, a standard music CD cuts off right around 22 kilohertz, and humans usually can't hear above 20 kilohertz. And most music recordings and spoken word stuff, just anything you'd buy on a CD or download or whatever, it usually cuts off at 20K or 20 kilohertz. And back in 1963, it was usually considerably less. So with that in mind, I just had to bring that up because this disc claims that it goes up to 25 kilohertz, which is hardly implausible. But here's the thing. Vinyl follows a certain curve. If you go online and look up the RIAA curve, you'll notice that vinyl starts to dip off around 10 kilohertz, and it really drops off like a rock around 16 kilohertz. So I applaud them, but, well, let's finish the test, huh? Follow along as best as you can.
15,000 cycles to infinity.
The music segments on this album are kind of your garden variety early stereo, live in the studio, 2 and 3 track recordings, which is certainly interesting listening from an audio nerd standpoint, because you get to pick out what kind of styles were more conducive to that sort of recording environment and what wasn't. And so what I found even more interesting than that was the fact that Audio Fidelity always had a quirky streak. I mean, yeah, it peaked in the 80s with the Happy Hamsters, but going all the way back to the late 50s and early 60s, their roster just ran the gamut from really awesome to really awful. And so what I'd like to do here is play some stuff from this record because there's no context on the record whatsoever. It just kind of goes from one thing to the next. And yeah, you'll hear it. You'll hear some nice Dixieland thing one second, and then some really awful, drunk, angry-sounding orchestra the next, and you'll have a nice French tune playing one second, and then you'll have some really god-awful early 60s pop rock group the next. So, yeah, this is kind of a long segment, so I'll shut up. So, here's some highlights and lowlights.
Et les pattes, et le dos, et la queue, alouette, 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 gentille alouette, alouette, je t'applumerai, alouette, gentille alouette, alouette, je t'applumerai.
I was just passing through when out of nowhere along came you. Out of nowhere along came you. But I didn't care about you. But I didn't care about you. There will be no more tomorrows. There will be no more tomorrows. Just today.
She said that I had charm. She kissed me on the shoulder and she damn near broke my arm. Get along home, Cindy, Cindy, get along home. Cindy, Cindy, get along home. Cindy, Cindy, I'll marry you someday.
All right, let's take a look at my other stereo test disc. This was put out by Radio Shack on their in-house Realistic brand, and this, like the Audio Fidelity disc, came out back in 1963. And it still has the price tag on it. I don't think the camera will read it, but it's sold for $2.49. Just thought I'd say that. Now, unlike the Audio Fidelity disc, this is a hardcore technical disc. There's no gimmick recordings here. This whole album is comprised of tests and music stuff designed to push your system to its limits. And as far as the tests are concerned, there's at least one on here that I'm pretty sure the idea was created by some, slightly evil lab technician to see if he could make the needle shoot right off your record.
Cartridge tracking, low frequency tone test. Left channel.
In my opinion, this album is kinda hit and miss. On the plus side, it contains this handy-dandy little leaflet which, while pretty dry, it does fill you in on a lot of the jargon and it tells you what the point of the tests are. So it's got that going for it. And then it's got, on the second side of the disc proper, you've got this musical recording of a college brass ensemble, which musically it's a tad wonky, but it's more notable for what it is technically, and that's the point of the disc. And what it is a really nice, clean, direct-to-disc recording, no tape involved, that does a pretty damn nice job of pushing the recording and playback technology of its day to its limit. On the minus side, some of the tests on this album just seemed kind of lazily tossed off. And worse yet, there's kind of there's a consistency problem. Things just vary all over the place. So, for example, at the beginning of side 1, where all the tests are, you have a decent enough channel ID test. This is the left channel, this is the right channel. And from there, it goes into a white noise test. You have the stereo white noise playing, and it emphasizes each side by turns. But the thing is, it skews kind of left. But yet, during the channel ID test, the left channel came out at a bit lower volume than the right. Anyway, after a couple of these tests, I started to get kind of concerned. So I went and I found the only half-speed mastered mobile fidelity audio nerd album I've got, a copy of George Benson's Breezin', and I threw it on, and lo and behold, things were just fine.
This is the left channel. This is the left channel. This is the right channel. This is the right channel. Channel balance test.
Now, before I close things out for today, I'd like to just very briefly address a recurring complaint that I've been getting for a very long time now. And this is in regards to, of all things, my choices for music over the end credits. So, here's the thing. In response to this, and this being Stereo Day and all, I thought I'd try a little experiment. Today you'll have two options for end credits music, classical or jazz. Now, if you want classical, you'll just want the left channel, and if you want jazz, you'll want just the right channel. And if you're wearing headphones, just hold up the appropriate ear. Or just leave it stereo if you want some sort of avant-garde thing. Anyway, hopefully that makes everyone happy, but I doubt it, because that's it for today's archive. Join us next time when I field even more complaints about really only two choices. Fascist.
Second floor, ladies' bargain counter.